Good morning again. Today I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the technologies that we have nowadays, the techniques that we can use to further our spiritual and personal evolution. And this comes up because right now, going on where I am, as I'm recording, is the EFT Tapping World Summit. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but maybe you're on it with me. It's 10 days or so of free recordings that you can listen to of various EFT practitioners and teachers and that kind of thing. Some very recognizable names are in there. And they are basically talking about how to use EFT tapping or meridian tapping for various issues that you might have in your life, like health or success or relieving anxiety or forgiveness or whatever it is that you might need. They cover a pretty wide spectrum. And every time I do this, it reminds me of how powerful and helpful a tool EFT really is. You may have seen it. It's becoming a little bit more common. You may have seen it where people are tapping at various points on their face and on the body. And so these are the basic points: collarbones and under the arm. I always like to do the wrist, and I can't show you because I'm holding the camera, and then the top of the head, the inner wrist. And that's a whole sequence of the most basic. Bless me. Sorry about that. That's the basic sequence that's most commonly used. There's also one called Faster EFT that I find very effective and very quick and very subtle if you're wanting to do it in public or at a board meeting or something and you don't just want everyone staring at you while you're, tapping your face. But I love this summit. I've been doing it for about, I think, 7 years or something. And every time I do it, it reminds me of just how beneficial it is. Because, with anything, we get involved in life and forget, right? Swami Shivananda used to always say, we're not bad, people are not bad, they just forget. And so I forget to use it, and I forget how powerful it can be, and I don't know, sometimes I seem to build up a little resistance to it. And then I get this booster shot of the summit once a year and am reminded of how wonderful it is and how versatile and how I just, jump into using it again a lot more frequently. And that makes me think, sometimes what happens for me, I don't know about you, but what happens is that I get involved in other practices, and there's only so many hours in a day to do so many practices, it seems. And it's probably not true, but so some things just kind of fall off the back burner, and that's what happens with EFT. And then I do this booster shot and I get back into it, and then I start using it for everything again. And the other day I used it for, so far in the summit, I've used it for forgiveness of everything, anyone, including myself. I've used it for anxiety, for the critical inner voice. It's just been so wonderful. And sometimes, I don't know, I've seen this in other people. I'm not sure that I'm doing it, but maybe because I see it in other people. I've seen this in other people where they get kind of stuck in an idea that they don't want to use outside tools, and they don't want to use outside supports. They have to do it all from within themselves. They just have to knuckle down and do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just often slower. You know, these technologies and these people who are, we can go to for various services like energy moving or energy clearing, or could be anything from chiropractic to acupuncture to hypnotherapy. I personally believe that whatever gets us further on the path is great, as long as it doesn't become addictive or a distraction from the actual work. I mean, we still need to do our inner stuff, but I love bringing in support for that, and just to be able to, I love being able to jump up a level or 10 at a time and not have to kind of struggle with each little step up the mountain. And I've seen people who kind of get into this ego trap about that, where they don't want to be reliant on others, and they refuse to use other technologies, and they just want to use what they already know. And I've also seen that sometimes the thing that we least want to do is the one that will take us the furthest. I see this a lot on the spiritual journey. The one that we have the most resistance to is usually the one that the ego can sense or has already experienced is going to take the reins away from the ego and give it back to the soul the most. And it will fight that with every tool at its disposal. And one of the ego's most effective tools or some of the ego's most effective tools are distraction, sleight of hand, and kind of outright lying. Like the ego will tell us any kind of thing to keep us from really dismantling it or just taking the reins away. And I want to clarify because when I talk about this stuff, people often think, oh, can't you make friends with the ego? And why are you dissing the ego? And I don't mean to convey that the ego is an enemy by any stretch of the imagination. The ego is a tool, and it's a very useful tool, and I don't think we would function very well on this material plane without some level or some connection to ego. It's part of this life. And yet, the problem with the ego is that it wants to be in control. It wants to be drive-in. And that's like having a really great seeing eye dog or something and deciding to put it behind the wheel and let it drive you around town, literally in a car. That's just not that great of an idea. Or, to make it a little bit more realistic, if you had a team of horses and you were in a carriage, you don't just drop the reins and let the horses take you wherever they feel like taking you. There's something higher that needs to be kind of guiding things, making choices about where you're going and what you're doing. And I mean, if you know horses at all, you know that where you're going to end up is the nearest patch of green grass, and you're just going to stay there until they've, decide there's another patch that looks better, or, oh, hey, look at those daisies. What I'm trying to say is the ego is a great servant, but it's a terrible master. And where we get in trouble is when the ego is acting as our master. And that's the default setting on the earth at this time. We come in and we're trained by a culture that has ego as master. So in our early hypnagogic, like hypnotic years from age up to age 5 or 7, somewhere in there, we're in essentially a hypnotic state, and everything we take in goes directly into the subconscious and becomes how we perceive the world and ourselves. And what we perceive is that the ego is master, and often there's no even, other option presented to us. So it's our default setting, and we need to learn how to actually take the reins away from the ego, not in a heartless, aggressive sort of way, because that just triggers the ego's fears and need to be in control even more. So we just gently and gradually, convince the ego that that things go better when we're in conscious control than when we're in subconscious, habitual, mechanical type running on old programs. And then the ego can actually become a benefit and a support in the work. But first thing we got to do is, take the reins back. So EFT is very effective for that, because what it's doing is dismantling the old programming. And not everyone uses it this way, but it's also very effective for instilling new programming. We can tap out the old story, I am not enough, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, whatever it is that we have. We can tap that out. And don't worry about saying negative things. Oh my gosh, say the most negative things you got in you while you're tapping, because it dismantles them. It doesn't re-imprint them as it does if we're saying them without tapping. And then we can go on, after we've done a round or two or however many we feel we need, we can go on to positive programs that we'd like to install in ourselves. And this just sets them into the subconscious and into the body more powerfully and easily and quickly. I am enough. I have all the time in the world. I'm doing great. All is well and getting better. Whatever it is that we want to do or have more of in ourselves, we can do that through tapping. Whatever it is we want to have more of and less of in our lives, we can do that through tapping. And there are other tapping points, and each point has a different specific purpose, but we don't really need to know about all those. That's kind of the beauty of it. We don't really have to understand it. We just know that it works. You do this and and it works. So it's easy, it's fast, it's painless, it's virtually effortless, and it's super effective. And how many things can you say that about? So EFT is still one of my go-to technologies, and one that I love to share with people because it's so effective even in the short term. Like, I've done this with people who have no woo-woo technologies, or they don't meditate, they don't do any of that stuff. And then but they've had some issue come up. And like, I did this with one person, I guess I shouldn't say who had been through a miscarriage and was still carrying, years later, a lot of guilt that there was something she could have done that would have changed that outcome. And of course, probably there was nothing she could have done in the first place. That happens for reasons that are mostly cellular, biological in the fetus. And in the second place, even if there were by some chance something she could have done differently, it was years ago and it's too late to really change it now. But the mind doesn't work that way. The subconscious doesn't work that way. She was still living in the past. She wasn't in the present. And she was in a lot of pain. So I just sat her down and said, okay, follow me, do what I'm doing, repeat after me. And of course I'm channeling the words that come through, so they're very effective for her. which isn't a requirement for yourself, but it's helpful if you're doing it for someone else. And, we started with, okay, tell me what level, from 0 to 10, tell me what level this feeling of guilt and sadness or whatever is. And she was right up there at like 10 or 11, she was saying. And it's really important to do that beforehand, because at the end of it, I said, okay, well, we just did it for a while. And I said, how do you feel now? What's the level now? And she said, it's like at a 1 or a 2. And just in that short time, like I think it was half an hour, we changed something that she hadn't been able to shift for years, just like that. And the thing is, if you don't notice beforehand, if you don't take note beforehand of how high the level is, by the time you get to the bottom, you forget it. You look back and you think, oh, it wasn't that high, but really it was. So my point is that's just a helpful way to do it, to see. If you want to see how effective it is, start by saying, by pinpointing the level from 0 to 10 of how intense it is before you start, and then check in again afterwards. So I am going to run along with my day. I have a lot of tapping to do with this summit. We try to do all of them, but we do as many as we can fit in. And if you haven't got any understanding of tapping or anything, you might want to try it. Look it up online. There's a lot of videos or tutorials. I have a booklet. I don't know if you can access that, but I have a booklet on EFT as well, available through my site, the Wicca Spirituality site, wiccaspirituality.com. And in the meantime, see if you can't explore what other technologies, if you don't want to use tapping, see if you can explore what other technologies might aid you in your growth. But you know what? Let's just rewind that. Let's see if we can't all use tapping today. And if you've never used it before, your task could be looking it up online. Your practice could be walking through it with a video or two. And it's worth it, because it will make a difference. So that's our goal for today. That's what we'll take out into the day. And I will chat with you again tomorrow. I hope you have a really lovely, lightened day with the help of tapping. Blessed be.